In this episode, I talk about the important middle between reward and punishment, and that's where communication and dancing live. So here we go, episode 217, the dance. Hi, I'm Karen Rohlf, and welcome to Horse Training in Harmony. This podcast is about you making progress with your horse in a way that you both can love. It's about learning how to move and be in harmony. Because yes, you really can develop a horse to be both athletic and happy. When we show up as our best selves for our horses will show up for us. So let's get started. It is a beautiful, beautiful afternoon, and I felt conflicted because I really wanted to go back outside and hang out with Atomic, especially today. But I needed to record a podcast, so I decided to combine them. So I'm out here with Atomic, and we're going for a little walk. We go through the gate to what we call the side 6. It's these 6 acres in the woods on the side of our property. And I thought I'd just do a little walking and talking so I can hang out with Atomic and hang out with you guys also. Atomic, do you want to lead the way, bud? I love our little special walks together. So yeah, this is on the west side of our property, and so the sun starts to go down and filter through the trees, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. And it's also an area where Dana is turning it into a botanical gardens, and there's just so many things planted here. And here in Florida in February, it thinks it's spring, so already little buds are coming out and fun stuff like that. So where are we going, my friend? All right. Well, I'll just kind of follow his lead here, and maybe we'll do a little walking and talking. Anyway, so this episode, it's stuff that's been floating around in my mind, but I listened to a talk recently, and I love the basic vibe of the people who were discussing this. I think they really, have the horse in mind, and they were saying lots of good things, but a lot of it came down to a kind of discussion that comes up a lot. Sorry, like my words aren't clear. I'm a little distracted by my beautiful horse here. Anyway, the discussion sort of came up between, positive reinforcement versus use of punishment. And this is a typical conversation that comes up, and it's a really important discussion to have. It's really important to know about the 4 quadrants of training, and what is reinforcement and what is punishment, and what's the negative and the positive of each. So that's all really, really good information to have. But a lot of times it's like this false choice where it seems like there's only 2 options. You're, rewarding the horse and reinforcing the horse with positive reinforcement, or the other choice is like punishment, which is mean and cruel and doesn't work as well anyway. And so again, it's really important to know that. But I keep thinking of the reality of being a rider and a trainer and just a person who cares a lot about their horses, wants to work in partnership with the horse, and wants to roll up my sleeves and get into the real process of bringing a horse up the levels and advancing them and progressing their training and their athletic ability. So there's theory, and we need to know the theory, and there's practice. And I think it's really important to know the theory. It's also really important to know the practice. And this is where it's difficult and interesting and extremely rewarding when it works of how do we progress the training, and how do we remain fair and in good relationship with our horse, where the horse feels like they have choices and they end up feeling like this is a pretty good deal for them. So, big sigh from Atomic. Hey, buddy. So another talk I listened to recently was about another subject that I think is really important. And that's about using like consent signals or stop and start signals in training. And again, a great idea. It's definitely something I'm exploring. But a lot of times in those discussions, it ends up being said something like, yeah, they teach the horse a stop signal, but sometimes they just kind of learn it like a trick and they just ask to stop all the time. And there's sometimes that the horse will ask to stop, but they're kind of like, okay, I hear you, but come on, like, I'm not really asking you to do much. Let's just go ahead and do it. And so I think, again, there's the theory, but the theory, needs to be practiced in the reality of real life situations. And that's where things, sometimes it's like, well, it depends. And so kind of this, but yeah, in this case, kind of that. Now, the other thing I've been reading about or listening about, or people send me articles about, is this idea of animals, dogs, birds, horses, monkeys, lots of different kinds of animals being trained to push a button, to communicate something. And articles are often about like, wow, look how smart this animal is. They've learned to communicate with us. And that's another one. I'm like, yes. And I've taught my horses to hit buttons to communicate something to me. And I've been feeling quite proud, more proud of myself though, because, I always think that they have no trouble communicating. It's just we found an interesting way to teach them how to communicate kind of on our terms. So again, there's like three things kind of floating in my mind. And I was like, they're all kind of related in some weird way. And so that's what I sat down to record this podcast about, is like, let me just kind of think about those three things and then, muse, how I do this. I just kind of muse on them and hopefully something interesting will come out of this. Okay, so let's start with the buttons, because right now I do this. I have two buttons. One, they touch it and it says cookies, and then they get a cookie. And the other one says scratches, and then I scratch whatever itchy spot they happen to have. And I'll do this just for fun, because they really do seem to enjoy it. And then sometimes I'll do it before a training session of something else, because I kind of want to see, what do they want? Like, what's going to be the more motivating thing? Maybe on that day, they're going to tell me that the scratches is what they really want, more than the type of cookies I give them. And then another day, it might be like, they just want cookies. They don't care about the scratches. And another day, they might be like, cookie, scratches, cookie, scratches. And then I know, okay, I can use both of them equally. So they can kind of tell me, like, what's a high value treat? What's a low value reward? And then sometimes I just do it as its own fun game, because I feel like the horses are like totally working me. They're like, check this out. I hit the button and I get my human to give me this thing that I want. And I have noticed that they do understand what the buttons mean, because when they hit the cookie one, they'll come back and like look for the cookie. And when they do hit the scratches one, they don't necessarily do that, but they'll like present the body part that I was scratching. So I feel like, yeah, they totally understand the difference between the two buttons. And we've kind of worked out a bit of communication. But when I talk about it like that, I feel like just what I said. It's like, I hope they're feeling like, wow, check out my smart human. Look what she figured out. Because a lot of times these articles are like, oh, this horse, learned to communicate. No, horses know how to communicate. They have no trouble communicating stuff. It's a matter of whether we understand it. I think it's us. It's us humans that need the buttons, right? So we're having to ask our horse to learn a human kind of contrived situation to be able to tell us what we probably could figure out, hopefully, or that, in other words, they're absolutely able to communicate what they want. It's whether we can figure it out or not. So in the article, it was as if the animal didn't, it was as if the animal didn't train to use the buttons, it meant he wasn't communicative. And I just think that's nuts. I think that's really nuts. It's a very human, egocentric way of viewing an animal. So using the buttons, like I said, can just be super fun. But just remember, it's the horse that's actually taking this extra step so that we humans have a possibility of understanding what they mean. So we should be excited, but we should be excited for ourselves. Like, look, I figured out a way to understand my horse. Anyway, I think the most important thing is that we need to be taking our own steps to figure out how the horse is communicating such things to us in their way, in their language, without needing the human, dummy button to help us silly humans figure it out. Like, I think they're telling us, I think they have no trouble telling us what they want. And I think, cookies and scratches, that's probably, you can all right now picture a horse who is asked for scratches and picture a horse who asks for cookies. So they're perfectly able to express what they want. Can we figure it out in more and more subtle situations and in a variety of situations without the horse needing to be quote unquote trained to do something? So for example, Cora, my filly, she loves having stall time. We call it her special stall time. So she lives out 24/7, and in the morning, we're down in the barn and horses are loose and they can kind of come and go as they please. And Cora just loves to be in the barn and she asks to go in the stall. And so one of the morning fun things that happens in the morning is I greet Cora and I tell her I will let her know when her stall is available, right? And I pretend I'm the concierge at a upscale resort and spa, and I say, "Thank you, Miss Cora. We'll let you know when your room is available." Because sometimes there's a horse who's just ate his breakfast in there or something. And when it's available, then we open up the barn aisle and she will go to the stall. And she often gets to pick which stall she goes in. There's only two. Anyway, so, how does she communicate that? Does she have to hit a button? No, it just becomes clear by observing. My horses will tell me when they're feeling thirsty, when they're in the grooming stall. Sometimes we're in there grooming and they tell me they're thirsty. We don't have a button to train them that. They just look at the water station that's down at the end of the aisle. Sometimes they'll move their mouths a little bit or just look slightly fidgety. And we can kind of feel them thinking about the water. So we let them go drink. Atomic will tell me when he wants to play catch because he'll walk over to his ball and then he'll look at me and he'll look at the ball and he'll kind of look at me. And it's pretty clear. Ovation will tell me when he wants both cookies and scratches because he'll start touching the space in between the cookie button and the scratches button. And I think that's a pretty smart option, right? He's like, hey, this one means this and that one means that. I wonder if I get it right in the middle, do I get both? And yeah, he does, because I thought that was cute. So just as I put a button out for them to hit to tell me something, I think they put clues out for me, right? They're putting their own little buttons down for us silly humans. I think, I'm sure Solana is thinking something like, when let's see if Karen gets this. You know, when she nudges the gymnastic mat that I have leaning up against the wall that she loves to stand on, right? So she's like, let me touch this, and then look at Karen and see if she figures out that I like her to put it down on the ground. So she has no trouble communicating. So I just imagine, like, someday, somewhere, there's going to be this great story circulated through the horse community. And it's a story about a horse making a brilliant discovery about an extra smart human who remarkably learned that when they hit the right button, aka they touch the horse in just the right way, the horse will give them what they want. Amazing! The title will say, human able to communicate. So that's my view on that. So if we really want our horses to communicate with us, we need to give them some freedom to do so, right? So if their heads are always restrained and they're not allowed to move their feet independently and they're not given choices and freedom to make them, we can't really know what they want. Them expressing their desires doesn't always mean that they're always going to get what they want, because, you know, that's life. But we can take in that information, and based on a million factors and possible ways to respond, make decisions about what our choice will be, and then notice what outcomes we get. And if it isn't desirable, we can learn and modify our choice next time. But we need to be interested in knowing what they're trying to tell us. Now, as far as the reward versus correction versus, reward versus correction or punishment, there's something else. Like, whenever I hear that conversation, it comes down to, should you use positive reinforcement or should you use negative reinforcement, or should you, which is better, positive reinforcement or punishment? And I'm thinking, I just want to raise my hand and be like, well, what about all the stuff in the middle there? Which, yes, you could technically analyze and call, there's a little pressure, that's negative reinforcement, or there's a little, release, was that a reward, or was that just negative? Scientists can analyze that. But I want to be practical. I want to think, how am I going to explain this to students and really explain what to do? That's what I'm fascinated with. Like, how do we apply all these, minute details that a lot of people will argue and debate ferociously as far as what is the term that should be used to describe what's happening. And for me, I'm like, okay, we need a language so we can talk about stuff, but you guys figure that out. I'm going to concentrate on experimenting and doing what works with each horse. So let's see. So in between the, reward and correction, there's what I like to call like the giving of the information, right? So a lot of times in the conversations about positive reinforcement, it's almost used interchangeably with this idea of scanning and capturing. That if you're positive reinforcement, it means the only thing you use is scan and capture, where you just basically watch, and when the horse does what you want, then you reinforce it. You let them know and you reinforce it. And it's a great tool. That is a very effective method to develop a behavior. So, for example, that's how I teach my horses to lie down, right? So I set up an environment where they're probably going to lay down, or if they just happen to lay down and I'm there, I can do this. But basically, they're just minding their own business. I'm watching them. They start to lay down. I may or may not, I give a reward, not too soon, or you'll interrupt it, not too late, or they'll miss it. But basically, you just go, hey, that's awesome. I like that when they're doing the behavior. And then at some point, which again, people can debate of when that point is that you add the cue, you add a cue. I tend to, when they're starting to lay down from some sort of distance that doesn't interrupt them, I will mirror their behavior and kind of paw the ground and look at the ground, and I'll say something like, you want to lay down? And that becomes the cue. Now, because I don't have any other way to make them lie down, like I don't pick up a leg, I don't tie them, they haven't experienced the sort of more submissive methods of like, let go, I've got your feet and I will lay you down. So I don't do that. So what ends up happening with this, because I think laying down is a big emotional piece for a horse, for some horses. Some of my horses, when I invite them to lie down, they do. They're like, oh, okay, you want me to lay down? It's not a bad idea. And they'll lay down. Other horses of mine won't necessarily. They'll kind of be like, I don't really feel like laying down right now. And for me, because I don't really care, if I invite them to lay down and they're telling me, yeah, I don't really want to, then I go, okay, right? And then I might explore that and wonder about it and see what I could change later. But it's a kind of a good example of kind of bridging the scan and capture with some communication, right? Because I simply have a line that I won't cross. Like, okay, I can invite, I can persist a little bit, I can maybe change where I'm asking them to lay down or stand a little further away from them or make some changes that might, make them more apt to lay down. But there's a line of pressure that I'm decided I'm not crossing with that behavior of like, if they don't want to lay down, that's okay with me because, big picture in life, it's okay. It's not that important to me. I don't need to do a performance where, I'll be humiliated if my horse doesn't lay down. And it's not that a scan and capture can't work to actually create a lot of motivation for a horse to do a behavior, but it's just an example of something I might teach and then use my communication skills to listen if my horse tells me I'd rather not for whatever reason. The ground's too wet, I don't feel safe, or I just, whatever reason. So for something like that, I don't need a button for them to push to tell me whether they consent to this or whether they're like, hey, stop, don't ask me for that, because they make it pretty clear. They either lay down or they don't. I mean, sometimes they'll, if I say lay down and they don't feel comfortable laying down for whatever reason, they might not only not lay down, but they might be like, no, and they'll turn away and want to walk away. I'm like, oh, wow, they really don't want to lay down. And I may or may not figure out why. I'll think about it. But it's pretty clear. I don't need to teach them a stop signal. I just need to listen to what they're saying. Now, this works. I can say that when I'm sure that the horse understands the behavior, right? So if they don't understand what the heck I mean when I say, hey, want to lay down, then it's not that they're telling me they understand and don't want to. They're just saying, I have no idea what that means. And then I have to educate, right? I have to educate. I need to give them more information. So now let's think of a pretty simple behavior. Let's just picture I have my horse on line. I'm going to let him do some circling on line. So he's facing me and he's a little bit of a distance. He's not right on top of me. And I'd like him to circle off to his right. So I bring my attention that way. I turn my chest and I kind of maybe bring my left hand back a little bit to kind of open the door and invite him to go that way. So let's say, he faces me and nothing happens. I'm going to ask myself, does he understand? And if I have to educate him, then I'm not going to sit there just twisting my body and hoping that maybe accidentally he goes there. I might do that for a moment. I might exaggerate it, be like, hey, come on, we're all going this way. But I also might pick up my other hand and wave it around, wave the air around, and cause the horse to move away from that. Oh my gosh, an aversive. Yeah, but I'm waving the air around. I might make a funny little noise or, flop the flag or something just to have them just for a moment look in that direction, and then I can say yes, I can reward that. I can give them a little baby step and go, yeah, something like that. You got the answer, right? So otherwise we might just be sitting there staring at each other with a horse who's perfectly willing to give something a try, but they don't understand what I mean. And they're just like, oh, why are you twisting like that? So the goal of giving of the information, giving of more information, is so that my horse goes, oh, that's what you wanted me to do. That's what I dream they're thinking, right? We have to teach them that this thing that we're doing is meaningful. And so let's say we're past the education part and we do the same thing, and it's an educated horse and he doesn't move. I mean, then we have to look at ourselves and go, have I desensitized this? Why doesn't he want to move? Is he just not want to move because I've been an unclear communicator? And he's like, I don't know, you kind of twist a lot. I'm not sure if you really mean it. And we've not been pure and we've accidentally untrained it. There's a million reasons why. Maybe he's not motivated. Maybe he's in pain, but maybe he's not in pain. Maybe he's just like, oh, I really don't feel like it. This is my nap time. But he's healthy and he's sound, and it's like, okay, come on, but the vet's here, or I just need to exercise you because what you don't know is it's going to be terrible weather and you're going to have to be in, and this is our only chance, So I think there's a possibility where the horse is like, I don't really feel like it, but it's within fair to say, I hear you, but like, let's go. Like, maybe, horse, you don't understand all the considerations, and I'm going to wave this thing in the air. And, and that by doing that, we're still a long way off from punishing them or whacking them because they didn't move. And this is where the conversation goes to, we need to only reward and never whack. I'm like, okay, awesome. But what about the stuff in the middle? What if the horse doesn't give you anything to reward? Can we do something that causes the horse to go, oh, okay, all right, I'll do it. Now I understand what you mean. And still be far, far away from the whack, the punishment, the cruelty, the force. And I think that when the conversation gets a little too dogmatic and too tied up in the terms, and we never, ever, ever want to do anything aversive to our horse, I mean, I agree we want to minimize that for sure. But I think there's times when we want to give information, and that's not just a euphemism, right? So I always feel a little weird saying this. I'm like, oh, Karen's just using a euphemism to rationalize that she can whack her horse and call it giving information. No, I think there's room in there. There's room in there because that's in the middle. In the middle is the education. It's the helping the horse find the answer. And as much as I believe we need to let the horses figure things out, right, and not always live in control, right, that we give them a chance to do it one way and then try another way and see what the difference is. It's not, we don't have to cross over into control to be able to give some information, something helpful. And that's where I really think it becomes a dance, right? So if the only choices are to wait and hope the horse does something we can reward, or escalate pressure until it's cruel and punish them if he does it wrong, like that's not the only choices. It's good to play around with the extreme of like, how much can we get by just observing and scanning and capturing? Awesome. That's amazing. And it's really good to have a line and say, punishment does not work, and this is cruel and this is forceful. But where is that line? And I think if you look at the scale, it's usually a much bigger, longer scale. There's much more room than people say. Like, just because you move the airspace around your horse on one side and maybe somebody else in the world whacks their horses with that tool, doesn't mean that the horse in front of you, that it can't be very fair and giving very helpful information so the horse can be more successful sooner, and then you don't have to do that as much. So I think that's the most interesting and nuanced part, the education part. You know, this cue means that. Which body movement that I'm doing in my body is meaningful, which isn't. And again, having said that, yes, we have to be really, really careful that we don't cross the line and just begin controlling everything. You know, but you can be using information, giving them information, touching them without it becoming cruel, without it turning into control. But that's the art. Give the information they need to be successful and allow them the freedom to actually make choices and do it. And that's when it really, really feels like a dance. And I invite everybody here to go on YouTube and search for West Coast swing improvisation. I'm fascinated by this. Like two dancers take the floor, they've never practiced together, they get a song that they don't know, and they're going to dance. And I mean, I think about there's so much more than no information being given, right? There's pressure, there's connection, there's, you know, they're holding each other's hands or bodies. The leader is guiding them. There's so much listening and feeling and matching of energy back and forth. It's really physical and it's really light. And that's the picture that I aim for in riding. For me, it's the ultimate feel, where as the rider, I'm leading the dance, and imagine that word leading in air quotes. I'm leading the dance, but there's so much room for the horse to express his or herself. And in those West Coast swing improvs, you can see that sometimes the female, the follower part of the dancer, might create an energy or a vibe that then the quote unquote leader will match or follow or play off of. It's so much more than just cookie or whack. There's pressures, quote unquote pressures, that can be helpful. And again, that's not a euphemism for force, control, or pain. There always has to be a line that you don't cross, just like with dancers. The connection can be firm, the pressure clear, but a grip and a smack would still be completely out of line. We can't begin unless we have consent to touch. And we can give our horses some freedom to express themselves. We can listen to what they're telling us. If they say no, we can stop, honor, and then later investigate why. We can educate them to understand what we want and educate ourselves to notice and listen and learn from them. All in an environment that's conducive to cooperation. And most importantly, we educate ourselves in a way that would make our horse want to publish a paper about how darn smart their human is.